Ever look at a work of art and just wonder, where do I even begin? Do you look at its style, its history, the world it came from? Well, today, we're going to take a journey through the last 70 or so years of Chinese art history, and we're going to trace how our whole way of seeing has changed. We'll go from these foundational, classic methods all the way to a brand new way of thinking that, believe it or not, is perfect for our crazy age of AI. So, let's start the climb.
Our source material kicks things off with this beautiful metaphor, and it just perfectly frames what we're talking about today. For decades, scholars have been trying to map this huge, complex mountain of Chinese art. What we're going to do is look at the different maps they created and see how each one shows us a totally different path to the top.
Okay, so any great expedition needs a map, right? Well, back in the mid-20th century, two absolute giants emerged in the West, and they drew the very first modern maps for studying Chinese art history. They really established the two foundational peaks that almost every other path would start from.
And those two peaks were Wen Xifang over at Princeton and James Cahill at Berkeley. Now, these guys were brilliant, they were contemporaries, but they looked at that mountain from completely different angles. Fang was convinced the answers were inside the painting, in its structure, its brushstrokes, its style. But Cahill, he argued that to really get it, you had to look at the world around the painting, the money, the politics, the society.
So let's start with Wen Xifang. He basically created Chinese art history as a formal academic field in the West. His big idea was what we call structuralism. He believed you could analyze a painting's composition, its internal architecture really, and use that to build a clear timeline of how styles evolved. For Fang, the story of the mountain was told in its own geology, its own rock formations.
James Cahill, on the other hand, was asking a totally different question. He just wanted to know, for whom did painters paint? Simple, right? But it changes everything. He wasn't mapping the mountain's geology, he was mapping its economy, its society. He was studying the art market, how artists became professionals, all the commercial stuff that actually shaped what got painted. He was looking at the villages and the markets down at the mountain's foot. So with those first maps drawn, a new generation of scholars starts to come along. And, they respected those old paths, but they also started to question them. They began looking for new, more detailed, and sometimes totally different routes up that mountain.
Take Joan Stanley Baker. She's a perfect example. She actually started at Princeton with Fang, but ended up leaving because they just couldn't agree on method. See, while Fang was looking at the big picture, the grand composition, Stanley Baker zoomed all the way in. She developed something called brushwork behavior analysis, looking at the speed, the force, the rhythm of every single line. Her question wasn't, when was this painted, but whose hand actually made this tiny stroke? It was like a forensic CSI approach to art history. And then you have Wu Hong, who came from a completely different universe. He was trained in both China and at Harvard, so he wasn't really tied to either of those big schools. He wasn't just interested in the painting or the society. He was asking, how does art create meaning across space and across time? He'd study how a piece of art becomes a monument, a huge symbol of power and culture. And then, centuries later, how it dissolves into a ruin. And what does that whole process tell us about memory and loss and history itself? It's a much bigger, more philosophical question.
So we've got all these different paths carving their way up the mountain. But there was one particular lineage that built directly on Wen Xifang's foundation, but transformed it into something totally new. And this, right here, is where we see the next major leap in how we see art.
You can literally trace the academic family tree. Wen Fang taught Xu Shouqian, who took Fang's ideas about style but then mixed in this really rich cultural history perspective. And then Shi Shouqian taught Ailofen, who would take the next truly revolutionary step.
Ailofen went and founded a whole new discipline, text and image studies. And the crucial insight, the real game changer, is this. It's not just about how a poem describes a painting or how a picture illustrates a story. No. It's about how text and image are equal partners that actually create meaning together. They don't just reflect each other. They generate a new reality that couldn't exist if you only had one or the other.
And this was a huge deal in 4 ways. First, she built it up as its own brand new discipline. Second, she completely redefined the relationship. It's not just interaction anymore, it's co-generation. Third, she blew the doors open on its historical reach, so it could apply to anything from ancient scrolls to modern ads. And fourth, she made the method universal. It wasn't just for Chinese art. It could be used for any culture, anywhere.
Now, this table really just lays it all out. You can see the whole journey right here.
You've got Fong's structural dating, Cahill's social history, Stanley Baker's super-focused analysis, and Wu Heng's big-picture critique. And then, right there at the bottom, you see Ailo Fen's approach. It's not just another method, it's a whole new category that focuses on that generative relationship. It's just a crystal-clear picture of a total paradigm shift.
So why does this deep dive into academic history matter to us, like, right now, today? Well, because this new way of seeing, this whole text and image studies thing, is arriving at the exact moment humanity needs it the most.
See, this isn't just an art history theory anymore. It's really a framework for what people are starting to call humanities research 3.0. It's basically a new set of tools for understanding how we make meaning in a world that is just saturated with digital media and, of course, artificial intelligence.
Just think about it for a second. When you type a prompt into an AI image generator, like Midjourney or DALL-E, what are you actually doing? You are using text to create an image. You are engaging in the central process that this entire field of study was built to analyze. All of a sudden, this isn't some dusty academic question. It is at the absolute heart of our new digital world. And there it is. The work of Ailo Fen and all the history that led up to it gives us the perfect framework to understand one of the most powerful, transformative technologies of our lifetime. It gives us the language and the methods to really dig into how AI is building our new visual reality. So let's go back to our mountain one last time. Let's stand at the summit and look back at all the incredible paths that these brilliant scholars forged for us. James Cale, he showed us the lifeblood of the mountain, the people, the commerce, the society that supported it right from the ground up. Wenxi Fong, he gave us that first topographical map, that grand framework of styles and periods that let us even begin the climb in an orderly way. Joan Stanley Baker, she was the expedition's botanist, getting down on her hands and knees to make sure that the plants we were seeing were the real deal, right down to the last fiber. Wu Heng was our philosopher and our geologist. He showed us how the mountain was seen across thousands of years, how it was built up into a great monument, and then how it slowly crumbled, becoming a ruin that held the memory of everything that was lost. And Xi Shaoqin, the one who bridged that gap from Feng to Ailo Fen, he was the cultural historian. He told the stories of everyone who had climbed before, tracking how the memory and the meaning of that mountain traveled and changed as it moved across cultures. And all of that brings us right here to the present. The work of Ailo Fen in text and image studies gives us the tools to ask the final and most urgent question of all. When an AI can create a perfect image of a mountain from just a few words, what does the very concept of mountain even mean anymore? In art, in culture, in our own minds? This is the new landscape we all have to map together. And thanks to these scholars, we finally have a compass.